Welcome to Laptop Radio. Today's topic is gamification for games. We have Jason here who is hosting this with me, and our expert is Jerry.
Hi, I'm Jerry Fuqua.
Hey, Jerry. So I hear that you're from Optus Group, which is the worldwide leaders in gamification. It's a pleasure to meet you. Let's get started. Could you please tell the listeners about your story and what you do?
Let me update that. I was with the Octalysis Group. I left last year to pursue other projects and other endeavors. But basically, my background is in mathematics and physics, and actually physical oceanography. But I also became involved through Yukai Chung in gamification. A number of years ago, I actually hosted a panel of world-leading gamified experts. And then the Yukai asked me to join the Octalysis Group about 7 years ago. And I went with them for several years. Basically, my interests now are distributed ledger technology, which people refer to as blockchain, and a certain amount of artificial intelligence, which I used to do for the Defense Department many years ago.
Awesome. That's a very colorful background. Can you elaborate more on what you do now per se? Have your own company? Do you develop your own solutions? Do you work on a project on a one-on-one basis?
Yeah. Since both of the projects I'm involved with now are proprietary, I can't elaborate very much on that. I can say that one is involving what is the popular buzz phrase now is generative AI. And then the other one is actually applications of blockchain technology in non-cryptocurrency applications.
That sounds amazing.
That's about all I can tell you.
Okay, yeah, we don't have to discuss the details necessarily about the companies you're working with, but let's talk about the industries and your thoughts within those industries, if you're okay with that. I know the big buzz, like you mentioned, about the generative AI, and that's a huge topic right now. Would you like to touch upon that topic and your perspective on generative AI right now and the whole rise in AI?
I actually think it has immense potential for a number of different areas. Also, not just creative ideas like text and publications or art, it's also applicable in finance, which is rather strange because most people don't think of those actually meeting up. But basically, you can use generative AI to investigate situations. And that's about as far as I can go in that area because the information is proprietary and it involves funding, so I have to be very careful.
Oh, no, that's totally okay. We don't have to dive deeper on that topic. But what got you into the AI space, considering how you came from a very colorful background?
Well, actually, many years ago, after I received my PhD in physical oceanography, which was focused mainly on numerical modeling and computer simulations, I ended up working for the Naval Ocean Systems Center, which is now called SPAWAR. It's a branch of the DoD, which investigates and develops technologies for the military, and to a lesser extent, government use in general. And the first thing I became involved with was artificial neural nets. In fact, I did a lot of research in something called ART2, Adaptive Resonance Theory 2, which is an old model for neural nets and machine learning. And that kind of led me down the path to becoming more interested in artificial intelligence. And I became somewhat of an expert in machine vision. Well, if I keep going on, I'll take up the rest of the day, so I better stop there. But basically, machine vision and the technology that supports it. Basically, cameras and optics and intelligence, integrated circuits that are adaptable. And the whole reason was they needed a way to improve dynamic range so that sensing cameras could see into very difficult environments, essentially where you have a lot of light with a lot of shadows, and it's hard to see what's in those shadows in the visual range. And that's what I dealt with. I did work a lot with Sony because at that time they had the most sophisticated optics and sensoring technology, integrated circuitry. and the DoD had a partnership with them. It's still going on, but back then it was like for 4 or 5 years. Now, what's interesting in that, I'll give you a side story. There was an interesting spin out of that technology, which had medical applications. And the group I was in also did a lot of robotics. And a lot of the people from that group went on to start other companies. And though I don't know if anybody directly came from my group, Intuitive Surgical, which is now a huge company in Sunnyvale, and they're known for the Da Vinci robotic system, which allows surgeons to perform delicate surgery across the world. And they can be remote, but they often are in the same location. But it gives the surgeons quite an ability to do intricate surgery, particularly in neurosurgery.
Wow, that's amazing.
That's a side story.
I love how one thing led to another, which led to additional advancing the technology that you've been a part of. Just to reel it back in a bit, and I love the side story. Could we also discuss about how maybe that, if I'm not mistaken, influenced your thought process on gamification, how you got into idea of gamification of a lot of different aspects in life?
Part of my involvement with the DoD made me realize that there's a lot of technology that can have significant applications outside of what we were thinking they were using. Essentially, for military uses, it went into medicine. And then becoming involved with a couple other individuals, one was Yukai Zhao. I realized that he was of the opinion that gamification could be used for all sorts of applications that we don't have a clue about. He wanted to make clear gamification was not for game design. It's not a part of game design, but it could be used in game design to make it more effective. And his comment was that if you look at game histories, publications of games, most of the games fail, no matter how much money or how much manpower works in it. But if the game is well designed and if it's gamified, so motivates the users to engage and stay engaged, then you have a successful game. In his book, Actionable Gamification, he goes over a number of situations where games were not really funded that well. They had mediocre graphics, were huge successes because they took advantage of the basic rules of gamification in designing the game and the story that accompanies the game.
Can you touch upon that idea of the gamifications strategy that were effective, especially for the example you gave?
Well, we might do a little side trip and talk autolysis, but basically there are 9 motivating core drives. Is saying, no, there are 8. Well, in autolysis, there are 8, but there's a hidden underneath the 8 core drives, which is essentially, you can say, stimulation or physical stimulation. That's the thing that makes sex so great. But the other 8 core drives are all mental. Well, sex is mental too. But if you can design your application or game in terms of using one of these core drives or a combination of core drives, you can make it greatly fulfilling and engaging for individuals to become aware of it and get involved with it and maintain involvement. And that's why, for instance, in game design, often the narrative is so important. You tell a story to get the users to engage and play with it, and then they develop an entrenched interest. And we go through the phases of game design and gamification, and it starts with the onboarding, or actually discovery. Discovery is first, just becoming aware of the game or the application and just testing it out, just willing to kind of touch it and say, oh, this might be interesting. Most games, they kind of get off on a good footing, but they fall flat. They don't develop that discovery very well. And people say, yeah, okay, I'll think about playing it later. And they always put it off and then they forget about it.
Yeah.
But if it grabs you, maybe that's what TikTok does. It kind of grabs you at first and you just get addicted to it and you will keep wanting to do it. That's the onboarding and the scaffolding, which develops you into the game. And the more you learn about it, the more you like it. And there's a storyline there too, but the narrative is always a key component.
Yeah, no, I agree with the narrative. And I actually had 2 questions. I want to talk about the narrative, but before that, for the listeners out there that aren't familiar with the other 8 core parts of the gamification that you mentioned, or the pillars, could you please quickly go over the other 8 along with the 9th one?
Okay, the first one is epic calling and meaning. It's wanting to do something that it's not just about you, it's about a group or a family association. Why you share with individuals to improve everything for everybody. So that's the epic meaning on calling. That's also known as the whitest of white hat core drives. Then there is accomplishment, which is core drive number 2. That means you have a goal, collecting points or badges or something, and then you feel like that stimulates you, your desire to conquest, a conquering soldier or whatever. Then we have the creativity. Well, that captures the artistic, the right brain side of your mind, and you want to do something unique and you feel good about that. There's always ownership. Well, that's the idea that you have a prize and it has value to you, so you want to maintain it and you want to improve upon it. You want to get more of it. Like collecting Bitcoins and collecting NFTs. Well, because they become extremely valuable and you want to hoard them actually until a better day. Then we have social influence. So that's core drive 5. That is the drive that you want. You have the feeling that your social group, you can improve that, you improve relations. It makes you feel good if people accept you and consider you part of the family. And then we have scarcity, and that often has a time element. Like time's running out, you better do something quick. You're motivated. And then you have essentially uncertainty, which is kind of like playing poker or gambling. It's also playing golf because you don't know what's going to happen, but it's exciting. It's like not knowing the unknown. I think that's what also drives really good scary movies. It draws people to it. And then there's a law, essentially just losing something and you hate that feeling. The way it's arranged, it runs around an octagon, and things on the left side tend to be extrinsic. They're kind of external to you. Well, the core drives on the right side are intrinsic. It makes you feel good inside, or it makes you feel uncomfortable inside, but that's also exciting. And then the fact that in the y-axis, the core drives at the top tend to be white hat. They're very positive. Well, the core drives at the bottom are dark hat. You don't really want to feel that way too much. Like as much as I like golf, sometimes I just don't want to feel bad about my play. But I tell you, if I'm playing well, oh, I love it.
Oh yeah, that positive reward of doing great, but then at the same time, you also don't want the negative side of not doing it correctly, so you keep getting better at it and keeps pushing you.
Right. And what's interesting about the black hat core drives is that they can actually be used for a positive effect. What it does, it's like in discovery, it motivates people that they feel like they're losing out if they don't investigate something. If all your friends are using TikTok, you're motivated by the social contract, but at the same time, you feel like you're left out. You feel like I need to go and find out about TikTok or get an account. It tends to be a black hat motivation. That really is highly motivating in the beginning. It tends to have less of an effect as you become more engaged. And to keep you engaged, you want to have the white hat core drives. Because they're long-term.
Would you say that the white hat in terms of motivation in general is a stronger force than the black hat, or what are your takes on both sides of them in that context?
I would say over time, definitely stronger. Over short periods of time, the black hat tends to be the strongest. It's like the lottery, right? $1 billion is up. Okay, and you only have 2 hours left to get those tickets. You shouldn't, but you want your chance. You end up buying $100 of lottery tickets, which is kind of crazy, but that's your only chance, right?
Correct me if I'm wrong, it's also similar for a lot of companies on marketing strategies where they initially love to pull people in via scarcity tactics, but once they have them in the ecosystem, like you mentioned, the white hat strategy, they keep them longer for the better part of the company or the value that's provided.
It's like pulling in a stray cat, pulling it in and hissing at you, and then you start petting it over a long time, and then they warm up to you. They don't like that sudden pull, but when you start petting them, or maybe you feed them something, you build a relationship then.
And so for these pillars, do you feel like a lot of games nowadays follow these pillars to this extent, or do you still feel like a majority are not reaching these pillars or these expectations that creates a good engagement value from these games?
I think It's ticking up. I think more and more game developers are using these techniques. They may not realize that they're using octalysis, but they use several of the core drive techniques. And I think a lot of gaming companies have had workshops with Fuqua or the octalysis group, and it works out well for them. I know there was one company in the Netherlands, which was a marketing development company for the big corporations in Europe. And they actually began to see that gamification might work well for them to not only improve their footprint in advertising and marketing, but to make the employees of the companies that they feel better about, because the gamification techniques were applied at the employee level. And it turned out to be rather successful over the succeeding years. And at first, when I first thought about it, I said, yeah, gamification could be used for anything. But then for marketing and for business strategies or go-to strategies for large companies, I wasn't certain how that would be done. But our octalysis teams did a very good job in that. And they had complete buy-in from the company in, I think they were based in Rotterdam, but I'm not sure.
Do you feel like there's an overlap between the idea of gamification and also marketing? Because it does seem like they both incorporate strategies of bringing people in, retaining people, increasing LTV, at least on the marketing side. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a very powerful set of tools or philosophies. I have a friend, actually, he's a friend of Michelle's too, Ed Abramchek, who actually came out with a statement about 5 years ago. He said, I think the future of marketing is gamification. And that in the future, if you don't gamify, you're not going to be effective at marketing. He tends to be a very bright person. He has 2 engineering degrees from Stanford, but he's somewhat of a savant in finance. Yeah. In fact, had many meetings with CEOs here in the Valley because he does these one-page analysis of the companies, and he just amazes the CEO. Despite the fact that he's from a tech background, he's very fundamentally knowledgeable about advanced financial analysis.
Oh, wow. Can you elaborate more on the overlap between advanced financial analysis and gamification? And is that something is that common overlap, or is this a very one and done case?
It's a overlap that's in development. I think the fact that for the marketing research side of finance, develop the market and your customer base, it can be very effective, but in ways that I can't even explain at all levels.
I think gamification has a relationship with tokenomics and the way that token and crypto and blockchain Web3 companies market themselves and how they structure their tokens so that it is gamified to mitigate risk and also to prevent dumping in a way if it's structured correctly. I don't think the industry is fully there yet, but I think it needs to be. And if the tokenomics are designed in a way where it's gamified, it's more fulfilling, especially with a lot of the game projects where you earn coins when you play. For example, I have Steppen. Every time I use the app to walk, I earn some tokens. It is gamified. There's still a distinction between tokenomics with a token, and I call it gamified token, where an aspect of your overall tokenomics is to have your tokenomics gamified. Just my little insight on this.
The intersection in between that in terms of the GameFi space is very interesting. I have a kind of controversial question about that space, and hopefully we have a fun answer for this one.
I just want to put in a kind of a disclaimer. Several of the clients for the Octalysis group or blockchain crypto companies, and this is what they covered in terms of designing engagement and developing their tokenomics. I have to be a little careful what I say there because I don't think I've been released from the arrangement.
All good. Any part of the question you're not able to answer, just let me know. It is no problem. But the question I'm wondering is, when people experience these essentially gamified tokens or gamified projects where they are receiving tokens or currency due to their effort, how do you solve the part where people feel like they are receiving some tokens, but they feel like it's not a large amount to keep them interested in a game that might have been fully flushed out or developed. Because game development cycle takes quite a while for a quality game to come out. And I know the GameFi space is relatively new. So how do we keep people truly engaged while giving them enough tokens to feel like it's worth their time, essentially?
I think one of the techniques is to develop tranches or levels of token release or ways you can gain the tokens. In the beginning, all companies tend to want to have a lot of tokens out there that require no effort at all to gain, like an airdrop or something. And again, there's this one company in Canada that I can't really say anything about the strategy, but basically, you would go through that strategy just to get enough tokens so that you have enough people just moderately interested because they have something. Now, I'll have a controversial word here, and the tokens are reviewed as coins because there's no real value in the beginning. But the thing is, you want to encourage people to have them anyway, so that as you develop a platform or develop a service, they inherently become more valuable because you get closer to the point where you can actually use them as a utility token, for instance, or a reserve token of some sort, and then they get more value. But then you have to supply the scenario, the narrative of what your goal is. So people that invest their interest in a company because they see a purpose, they see a really good service or a really good platform, and they say, well, I'll take these tokens now, as many as I can get, because I can see that if they are successful, the tokens will be useful and they'll become very valuable. And then in the secondary market, they take off. Then at some point, you're going to have people involved and do something. You have to provide a little time, maybe reviewing a design or a reward or playing a game to a certain level or something like that. Then they are actually doing work, and then the tokens are valuable because they put some time into it. And then later on, when something is really flushed out and becomes valuable, everybody says, look, I got these tokens early. Now, when I got them, they were like worth $1 millionth of a penny. And now they're worth 50 cents. And I have 1 million of them. So I'm really rich, or they're useful. Yeah. So you have to go in stages. And that's part of the scaffolding effect of gamification.
Okay, no, that's a great answer. And what's your opinion on the timeline for a successful GameFi product to have these tranches in place? Obviously, it can't be done in 1 month to have a successful product from start to finish. But what do you think is a reasonable timeline, considering how fast this space is moving?
Well, yeah. Move fast and fail fast. Yeah, I think that was the motivation 10, 15 years ago in the Valley. It may not have been proven out very well over the last 10 years. It's been a lot of failures. But usually when a company takes off, it happens very rapidly. But you don't see when it's in the stealth mode. You don't see the fact is that they recruit hundreds of people to play a game or to test an application. And it's like the alpha stage and then the beta stage. Most people that play a successful game, well, actually, Zoom is an excellent example. Zoom burst onto the scene 4 years ago, and Zoom has some gamified elements. But as it turned out, Eric, the founder, when he started Zoom, it took him 5 years at WebEx, and he was in customer service. And he said for 4 years, he learned everything that was bad about WebEx and what you don't want to have. He was actually living the nightmare. Maybe it was Core Drive 8. All these Black Hat core drives were saying, oh man, this is not the way to do it, because all the customers were really upset. He separated. And it took him about a year to get some seed funding, but he got seed funding and developed a team. And after about 3 years of development, they went through these stages where they tested Zoom with invited guests or people, and they kind of worked it out. But they said it took 2 or 3 years. But then once they really launched, everybody says, where did this come from? Well, it actually had been around in one form or another for like 5, 6 years, either through his experience or through his test phase. And they don't realize how much time and effort went into it. But once it got going, and then the pandemic just ignited everything. Essentially, the whole world uses it. That's an excellent case where it may seem like things are moving really fast and they're failing fast and then redesigning, but actually it's quite a drawn-out project. And VCs realize this. That's why if you look at a VC fund, They may support 10 to 100 different startups,
Mhm.
but they don't really expect to see the maturity in the fund for at least 5 years. And normally, when it reaches 10 years, they retire the fund and start a new one. But they are expecting by that time they've made so much money for their investors that it doesn't matter. Also, you gotta remember, most small businesses, and consider VC ventures small businesses or startups, don't really see profits for a long time. And if they receive profits in 4 or 5 years, that's the typical American success story.
Mhm.
It doesn't mean they're going to last forever. It might mean that they never grow much bigger, but it takes a little time. And I think the problem we have with gamification too, we kind of expect things to move along much faster than they usually do. We have to weigh it down a little. We have to be more realistic. That
Mhm.
said, there are some companies, the Electrolysis Group has helped, which had immediate turnaround. And when I say immediate, 2 years. In 2 years, the gamification elements really took off. But humans are not instantaneous. They need to be persuaded or coached in some way. Yeah, it's the nature of the species. We might dive off the diving board right away and then we flop and we hurt. And you say, well, I'm going to rest for a while before I try that again.
Yeah. It's funny you say 2 years being fast because I feel like in the DeFi industry, 2 years sounds kind of slow, which is
Yeah.
the funny part of things.
Yeah, well, it's that feeling. Yeah, that does feel slow. But how many successful startups in crypto or blockchain have actually burst on the scene and become really successful and did not crash and burn? I mean,
Mhm.
we've seen a few in the last couple of years crash and burn after they were evaluated at many billions of dollars. And now they're just devastated. And all the investors went with them.
What's your opinion on why do you think, for the most part, those can be crashes? Just because they was at a fast pace? Is it because of market conditions? What's your hot take on this?
Are we allowed to talk about Bateman Fry? Basically, they do a real good job of recruiting funding. And unfortunately, two of the biggest failing stories in Silicon Valley in the last year, they had funding from one of my, I'll say, friends who was a founding partner of a VC who was extremely successful, except they invested in these two losers that it looked like they were going to take off and really be successful. And unfortunately, they were two of the biggest failures in the valley more recently. So, yeah, that's a tricky question to respond to. Yeah, I'm afraid I don't really have an intelligent response.
That's totally all right. I know it was quite a touchy and controversial topic, but I don't expect you to have the single solution right here on how to prevent crashing and burning for every company that comes out.
Ed Abramovich, our common friend, has mentioned many times that VCs are looked on as very successful money-making investing companies. And in general, that's not true. Most VCs aren't around that were here 5 years ago. And it's ironic that if you get 10% of your invested companies to be really, really successful, that's great because they pay for everybody else. Those are the unicorns that take care of all those losing companies you invested in. I'll throw out my little rule of 1, 2, 3, 4 that I learned about 10 years ago. That typically, if you have a fund that has 10 companies, right away, 4 of the companies, they know within 6 months, 4 of the companies are failures. They were just bad businesses. And they're written off because VCs can write off companies. And when they come to typically organic successes, that means a typical business that is run well will succeed and will be around 5 years from now or 10 years from now. But they're not really making much money for the investors, but they are successful. They're moderately profitable. And then there's always that glowing star, that number one. It's like the Facebook. It makes truckloads of money for everybody. What really scares the VCs is the 3. Those are known as the 3 walking zombies because they have a lot of potential, but they're really risky in certain aspects. In certain views, they are very risky. But VCs are afraid of not supporting them any further beyond 6 months or a year because they could turn out to be unicorns or they could be burning failures. Those three companies always take up the most time for VC to look back and analyze constantly. Because if they don't supply the second round of funding, if they don't get investors or other VCs to invest in the second round, they may not survive. They may die. But it's actually a fairly, well, not a common story, but it has happened in the Valley where founders of one company that wasn't funded to go to the next stage, they retire the company and they go off and find another company, and that company becomes a super company. And the VCs say, maybe we should have stayed with them longer.
I also know we are reaching almost the top of the hour. I don't want to take too much time out of your beautiful day down in the Valley, but is there anything you want to share with us that we have not asked or that we have not covered?
Well, right now, the general opinion on Silicon Valley is fairly negative because of the bank crisis and the crypto failures in recent months. To me, I just want to say it seems like it's a repeating cycle. If you look at the early 80s, PCs were a big thing, and then they kind of faded a little, and biotech was really a big thing, and then it kind of faded a little. And then the 90s came along, and then people discovered the web, and then the dot-coms took off, and I was involved with one of those, actually two of those. And then there was the crash, but it shook out, and they started recovering in the early 2000s. And then the mobile media and social media started taking off. And then they kind of went through a winter for a while, but they survived, they grew stronger. I think that's what's happened to crypto and to other areas in the Valley. So we're just going through maybe the crypto winter, but we'll probably have a crypto spring in the near future, and things will be back to normal. We'll go through the next cycle. I want to encourage people out there to don't write off technology or write off creativity. It always comes back. Even back 100 years. I think there's a famous professor at, I think it was MIT, Stephen Roach, who actually had a Newsweek cover article, I think in the early 1990s, called The Technology Paradox. And it shows that after the discovery of electricity and the development of electric motors, it took 50 years before factories actually started using electric motors and having electric lighting. And when the computer age started, which actually started in the 1930s, but realistically in the 1950s, it took another 30 years before banks really could start using computers to improve their business. I think the paradox is shortening the time of something really new. I'm thinking of Elon Musk because I'm thinking of SpaceX for one. It's getting shorter and shorter before a new technology really has application and starts affecting society. That's my message to everybody out there. The cycle is getting shorter and shorter, but it's still there.
No, that's great. In other words, believe in the technology for the future no matter what, because it'll keep going upwards.
Also, the fact that it can be applied in areas that you may not be aware of or even thought possible.
And I feel like that's always where the most interesting intersections happen, is when they do become, like you mentioned, gamification being applied to not games. And that's where we start breaking industries in a good way.
Yeah, I think Yukai once told me, he says, gamification can be applied to anything everywhere, even games.
That's funny to imagine because I imagine it came from games.
Well, basically, we looked at the success of games and how successful they've been over like 2,000 years. And then I think in recent time, people begin to ask, what is it about games that is so compelling, that motivates us, that makes it fun to engage? And that's when we started asking the questions and breaking it down.
Essentially, how they maintain such a strong retention strategy and how it can be applied to businesses.
Right.
I love it. Awesome. Yeah, thanks for joining us on this interview. It's been a pleasure chatting with you on all the topics under the sun, ranging from not only AI, but also DeFi space and gaming. I really love it and understanding the applications for it. It's been great chatting with you. And Michelle, I'll pass the mic back to you, or any final words to you, Jared.
Thank you.
Thank you. Awesome. I have one last question, and it is, do you have any advice for us?
Only advice is essentially what Apple always says, don't be afraid of dreaming.
Awesome.
I love it.
That's awesome. Alrighty. Thank you, everyone.
It's been a pleasure.
Bye.
Have a good day.